September 13, 2025. 11:47 p.m. Nancy Galliano was 63 hours into her sabbatical when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. At 34 years old, after 8 years of pulling companies back from the brink of total collapse, she'd earned the right to let calls go to voicemail. Especially calls that came in before midnight to the cottage she'd rented on Martha's Vineyard specifically to escape from exactly this. But something made her pick up. "This is Nancy. Ms. Galliano." The voice was male, controlled, but she could hear the hairline fractures in his composure. "My name is Jorge Britt. I run Britt Technologies, and I need," he stopped. Started again. "I'm calling because Declan Hayes said you're the only person who can help me. And I'm running out of time." Nancy sat up in bed, looking out at the dark Atlantic through her window. Jorge Britt. She knew the name. Everyone in tech knew the name. 37 years old, self-made billionaire, built a cybersecurity empire from his college dorm room. Worth somewhere north of $2.8 billion according to the last Forbes article she'd skimmed. "Mr. Britt, I'm not taking clients right now. I'm on sabbatical. 72 hours. His voice cut through her refusal. "That's all I have before my company collapses, my clients' data gets exposed, and everything I've built for 14 years disappears. I'll pay whatever you want. Double your rate. Triple it." Just another pause. "Please." The please got her. Nancy had been doing this long enough to recognize genuine desperation. And Jorge Britt, billionaire tech mogul who probably hadn't said please to anyone in a decade, sounded like a man watching his entire world burn. "Tell me what happened," she said. 23 hours later, Nancy stood on the deck of a ferry crossing Vineyard Sound, watching the Britt estate come into view on the eastern shore of Martha's Vineyard. Estate was an understatement. The property stretched across 5 acres of prime waterfront, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. Modern, expensive, and somehow completely soulless. Like someone had asked an AI to design billionaire's summer home and gotten exactly what they paid for. Nancy adjusted her leather messenger bag and checked her watch. September 14, 2:34 p.m. That gave them until September 16 at 2:34 p.m. to save Jorge Britt's company from total destruction. 72 hours. She'd worked faster before. Once. It had nearly killed her. A black SUV waited at the private dock. The driver, security, built like he'd been carved from granite, opened the door without a word. 10 minutes later, Nancy was being escorted through the estate's main house, past rooms that looked like they'd never been used, toward a home office that took up the entire east wing. And there, standing at floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic, was Jorge Britt. He turned when she entered, and Nancy's professional composure flickered. The Forbes photos hadn't done him justice. 37 years old, just over 6 feet, dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it for hours, sharp features that would have been intimidating except for the shadows under his gray eyes that said he hadn't slept in days. He wore an expensive white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, no tie, like he'd started the day formal and slowly given up. He looked exhausted. Terrified. And somehow still commanding enough to make her remember she was standing in a billionaire's house. "Ms. Galliano." He crossed the room in 3 strides, offered his hand. "Thank you for coming." His handshake was firm. Brief. Professional. But Nancy felt the tremor in his fingers, adrenaline and fear and too much coffee. "You have 70 hours left," she said, setting down her bag. "Tell me everything." Jorge had built his entire fortune on being the smartest person in the room. On seeing threats before they materialized. On never, ever being caught off guard. 3 days ago, someone had proven him catastrophically wrong. "It started as a routine security audit," he said, pulling up displays on 3 massive monitors. Nancy moved closer, her attention already locked on the data. "We run them quarterly. Tuesday morning, our team found anomalies in the encryption protocols. By Tuesday afternoon, we discovered a backdoor in our core systems." Nancy studied the code scrolling across the screens. Her expression didn't change, but Jorge saw her eyes narrow slightly. "This isn't recent," she said. "No. Best estimate is someone's had access for 6 months. Maybe longer." Jorge's jaw tightened. "They've been sitting inside our systems, copying everything. Client data. Proprietary algorithms. Security keys. Everything that makes Britt Technologies valuable." "Who are your clients?" 73 Fortune 500 companies. Government agencies in 12 countries. Banks. Hospitals. Infrastructure. Nancy whistled low. "So if this data gets out? It won't just destroy my company. It'll trigger the largest cybersecurity breach in history. Lawsuits that'll run into the hundreds of billions. Criminal investigations. People will go to jail." He paused. Probably me. Why 72 hours? Thursday morning, the board meets to vote on emergency measures. If I can't prove we've contained this and secured the systems, they're forcing me out and bringing in a federal team. Friday, the regulators arrive. If we haven't resolved this by then, he didn't need to finish. Nancy turned back to the monitors, her mind already working through possibilities, vulnerabilities, attack vectors. You said Declan Hayes recommended me. How do you know Declan? He's my COO. And my best friend since college. Jorge watched her scan lines of code at a speed that should have been impossible. He said you're the person who saved Vanguard systems in 2023. 48 hours, complete system rebuild, 0 data loss. That was different. How? Vanguard's attacker was external. Sloppy. Left fingerprints everywhere. Nancy zoomed in on a section of code, and Jorge saw her frown deepen. This is internal. Professional. Someone who knows your systems intimately because they helped build them. The words hit Jorge like a physical blow. You're saying someone on my team did this. I'm saying someone with architect-level access created this backdoor. That's not an outside job. Nancy finally looked at him, and her dark brown eyes were sharp with understanding. Who at Brit Technologies has complete system access besides you? Jorge's mind went to places he'd spent 8 years avoiding. To betrayals he'd thought he'd learned from. To the reason he'd built walls around himself so high that nothing could touch him. 3 people, he said quietly. Declan. My head of development. And my former business partner. Former? She left the company 8 years ago. After Jorge stopped. He didn't talk about this. Ever. After she tried to steal my IP and start a competing firm with my code. Nancy's expression shifted slightly. Not quite sympathy, but recognition. Let me guess. You were together. Engaged. The word tasted like ash. I was 29 and stupid enough to think love and business could coexist. I was wrong. And you've been doing this alone ever since. It wasn't a question. Jorge didn't answer it anyway. Can you fix this? He asked instead. Can you save my company in 70 hours? Nancy looked at him for a long moment. At this man who'd built a billion-dollar empire and somehow looked completely alone inside it. At the desperation he was trying to hide behind executive composure. At the way he stood like he was braced for her to say no and walk away like everyone else eventually did. She should walk away. She came to Martha's Vineyard to rest. To figure out what she wanted from her life beyond the next crisis. To stop saving men who'd forgotten how to save themselves. But something about Jorge Britt, something about the intelligence in his eyes and the exhaustion in his posture and the way he'd said please on the phone like it hurt him, made her stay. I can fix this, she said. But I need complete access to everything. Your systems, your team, your files. I need you to trust me with your entire company. Done. I need you to do exactly what I say, when I say it, without questioning me. Agreed. And I need you to be completely honest with me. About everything. No corporate spin, no protecting egos. If I ask you something, you tell me the truth, even if it destroys you. Jorge met her eyes. I've spent 8 years not trusting anyone with anything that matters. You're asking me to hand you everything in 70 hours and hope you don't burn it all down. Yes. He should say no. Should protect himself. Should remember what happened the last time he trusted someone completely. But Nancy Galliano looked at him like she could see through all his walls to the terrified 23-year-old who'd started this company in a dorm room and somehow lost himself building it. Okay, he said. Let's save my company. Hour 12, September 14th, 2025, 2:34 a.m. Nancy had commandeered Jorge's home office and turned it into a war room. 4 monitors displayed cascading data. Her laptop was running 7 diagnostic programs simultaneously. Empty coffee cups littered every surface. And somewhere in the chaos, she'd shed her blazer and rolled up the sleeves of her silk blouse, revealing the elegant lines of her arms as she typed at a speed that made Jorge's head hurt to watch. He tried to help for the first 6 hours. Quickly realized he was just in her way. Now he sat in the corner with his own laptop, handling the corporate crisis management while Nancy worked on the technical devastation. Talk to me about your former partner, Nancy said without looking up from her screen. What was her specialty? Encryption architecture. She designed most of our core security protocols before Jorge stopped. Before she tried to steal them. I know. Nancy's fingers never stopped moving. Did she succeed? Partially. She copied about 40% of our proprietary code before I discovered what she was doing. I changed everything after she left. New systems, new protocols. Nothing she touched remains. You sure about that? Jorge's blood went cold. What did you find? Nancy finally looked up. Her natural hair was pulled back in a low bun that had started neat 12 hours ago and now had several strands escaping around her face. She looked exhausted and absolutely in her element. This back door? It's using an encryption key that's 8 years old. Matches the architecture style of someone who learned your systems when they were being built. She pulled up a comparison on the main monitor. I'm not saying your ex did this. But whoever did was either trained by her or has been working with her. Jorge stood, crossed to the monitors. Marcus Chen. Who? My head of development. He joined the company 6 months after she left. Came with perfect credentials, brilliant recommendations. I vetted him for months before hiring him. Jorge's mind was racing. If she couldn't steal the company herself, she planted someone to do it for her. Nancy watched him process the betrayal. Saw the moment it landed, not surprise, but a kind of weary confirmation. You expected this, she said quietly. You've been waiting for 8 years for the next betrayal. I learned to be prepared. That's not prepared. That's paranoid. Nancy turned back to her screen. And in this case, completely justified. Your instincts were right. Something about the way she said it, matter of fact, without judgment, made Jorge's chest tighten. Can you prove it was Marcus? I can trace the backdoor to his access credentials. I can pull metadata showing when the compromises started. I can build you a legal case that'll send him to prison. Nancy's eyes met his. But that won't save your company. We need to close the backdoor, lock him out, and rebuild your security before your board meeting tomorrow. Jorge checked his watch. 58 hours left. What do you need from me? Sleep. You're useless to me if you're exhausted. Nancy gestured to the door. 4 hours. Then we work through the next 2 days without stopping. I can't sleep. The board will destroy you tomorrow if you can't think clearly. 4 hours, Jorge. That's not optional. He should argue. Should stay. Should maintain control. But Nancy Galliano looked at him with something that might have been concern beneath the professional efficiency, and Jorge realized he hadn't had someone tell him to take care of himself in 8 years. 4 hours, he agreed. Then I'm back. Then you're back, Nancy confirmed. She was already turning back to her screens. And Jorge? Yes? Thank you for trusting me with this. I know it costs you. Jorge paused in the doorway. How did you know? Because I watched my father spend 30 years trusting no one, building everything alone, convinced that vulnerability was weakness. Nancy's voice was quiet. He died at 59. Heart attack at his desk. Still alone. Still convinced he was doing the right thing. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just sleep. And when you wake up, we're going to save your company together. She glanced back at him. You're not alone in this anymore. Whether you like it or not. After he left, Nancy sat in the silent office, surrounded by the evidence of one man's brilliant, isolated empire, and wondered what it cost him to build walls this high. And whether 72 hours would be enough to show him what life looked like when you let someone help carry the weight. Hour 36, September 15, 2025, 2:34 a.m. They'd been working for 24 hours straight. Nancy had rebuilt 3 entire system architectures, closed 7 security vulnerabilities, and traced Marcus Chen's access patterns back 18 months. Jorge had fired his head of development, briefed his legal team, and prepared damage control for the board meeting that was now 12 hours away. And somewhere around hour 30, when they were both exhausted enough that professional filters stopped working, they'd started actually talking. Why crisis management? Jorge asked, bringing Nancy her 5th coffee of the night. You could do anything. Why specialize in saving disasters? Nancy accepted the coffee, took a long sip, then returned to the code she was debugging. My father owned a small business. Manufacturing. When I was 16, the 2008 crash nearly destroyed him. I watched him scramble, fight, rebuild. He was terrified and brilliant and so alone in trying to save everything. She paused. I swore I'd learn how to fix that. So no one else's father had to do it alone. Did you save his company? Eventually. Took me 3 years of teaching myself finance, operations, crisis protocol. By the time I was 19, I could have run his business better than he did. Nancy's voice carried old pain. But he wouldn't let me help. Said he didn't want me wasting my education on his problems. That's why you went into consulting. To save the fathers who'd actually let you. Something like that. Nancy finally looked at him. Your turn. Why build a cybersecurity empire? Besides the obvious billions. Jorge sat on the edge of his desk, coffee cup warming his hands, and tried to remember the last time someone had asked him a question that wasn't about quarterly earnings. I was 17 when my father died. Heart attack. He worked himself to death building a real estate company that collapsed 6 months after he was gone. Jorge stared into his coffee. Left my mother with nothing. I watched her lose the house, the savings, everything he'd worked for. All because he trusted the wrong people and had no backup systems. So you built systems that can't be destroyed by trust. I built systems that can't be destroyed by betrayal, Jorge corrected. Trust is the vulnerability. Remove trust, remove the weakness. Except you can't. Nancy's voice was gentle. You removed trust and built a company. But you also removed connection and built a prison. Jorge looked at her, this woman he'd known for 36 hours, who was saving his entire life's work, who somehow saw through every wall he'd built. You're very direct. I'm very tired. Exhaustion makes me honest. Nancy smiled slightly. Besides, you hired me to save your company, not protect your feelings. I hired you to rebuild my security systems. Same thing. Your company's vulnerability is your vulnerability. You built this empire alone because you were terrified of being betrayed again. So you made yourself untouchable. Unreachable. Nancy gestured at the pristine office, the empty house beyond it. How's that working for you? I have $2.8 billion. I'd say it's working fine. And who do you share it with? The question landed like a blade between his ribs. Jorge stood, crossed to the window. Outside, the Atlantic was black and infinite under a moonless sky. This is unprofessional, he said quietly. Probably. Nancy didn't apologize. But in 12 hours, I'm going to walk into your board meeting and tell them whether your company survives. And the answer isn't just about closing back doors and rebuilding firewalls. It's about whether you're willing to do business differently. How? By trusting people. By building a team instead of a fortress. By letting people in before you're forced to at gunpoint. Nancy stood, moved to where he was staring out at the darkness. You're brilliant, Jorge. But brilliance alone isn't sustainable. Eventually, you burn out or break down or die at your desk like my father, convinced you did it right. What's the alternative? Ask for help before you're desperate. Build relationships that aren't transactional. Stop seeing trust as weakness and start seeing it as investment. She paused. Let someone in before your company's on fire. Jorge turned to face her. They were standing close, closer than professional distance allowed. Close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark brown eyes, the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, the absolute certainty in her expression. Is that what you're doing? Letting people in? No. Nancy's smile was rueful. I'm currently hiding on an island, trying to figure out why I spent 8 years saving everyone else's disasters while my own life fell apart. So I'm maybe not the best role model. But you came anyway. When I called. I came because you said please. Because you sounded like my father the night he almost lost everything, terrified and trying not to show it. Nancy held his gaze. And because I'm apparently incapable of walking away from people who need help, even when I should. That sounds exhausting. It really is. They stood in the quiet office, two people who'd spent years building walls around themselves, suddenly too tired to maintain them. 34 hours left, Jorge said. Then we should get back to work. But neither of them moved. Nancy. Yes? Thank you. For staying. For helping. He paused. For seeing me. Even the parts one didn't want you to see. Nancy's expression softened. You're welcome. Now sit down and help me decrypt this last section so we can save your company and I can get back to my sabbatical. Right. The sabbatical I interrupted. The sabbatical I left because apparently I can't resist a brilliant workaholic who needs saving. Jorge sat. Pulled his laptop close. Started working through the decryption keys Nancy needed. And tried to ignore the fact that somewhere in the last 36 hours, saving his company had stopped being the only thing that mattered. Hour 72, September 16, 2025, 2:34 p.m. Nancy hit enter on the final command. Across all 4 monitors, security protocols locked into place. Backdoors closed. New encryption activated. System integrity confirmed at 100%. That's it, she said. Her voice was hoarse from exhaustion. Your company is secure. Marcus Chin is locked out. All compromised data has been isolated and protected. You're ready for the board. Jorge stared at the screens. At the proof that Nancy Galliano had just saved 14 years of his life's work in 72 hours. It's done? It's done. He should feel relieved. Triumphant. Grateful. Instead, he felt empty. Because Nancy had just finished the job. Which meant she'd leave. Back to her sabbatical. Back to her cottage on the other side of the island. Out of his life as quickly as she'd entered it. The board meeting is in 2 hours, he said. I'll present your findings. They'll restore my authority. We'll proceed with legal action against Marcus. Good. Nancy was packing her equipment methodically. I'll send you my full report by end of day. Invoice by Friday. What's your rate? For 72 hours of emergency crisis management, complete system rebuild, and solving corporate espionage? Nancy did the math. 6 million. Plus expenses. Jorge pulled out his checkbook. Wrote for a long moment. Handed her the check. Nancy looked at it. At the number he'd written. At the extra $12 million. This is $18 million. You saved my company. Saved my reputation. Probably saved me from prison. Jorge's expression was unreadable. 6 million doesn't begin to cover what you've done. Take the 18. Buy yourself a house. Take a year off instead of a few months. Whatever you want. It's yours. Nancy stared at the check. At more money than she'd make in 3 years of regular consulting. At financial freedom and security and everything she'd worked for. At the man who thought money could pay for what they'd built over 72 hours of vulnerability and exhaustion and seeing each other. She handed the check back. I don't want your money, Jorge. He blinked. What? I want your time. The office went absolutely silent. Jorge stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. My time? 3 months. No work. No board meetings. No emails. Just you, actually living, for 3 months. Nancy's voice was steady. Certain. That's my price. That's insane. I can't just walk away from my company for 3 months. Then you don't get it. Nancy set the check on his desk. You asked what I want. That's my answer. You've spent 8 years building an empire and forgetting to build a life. I want you to remember what it feels like to be human again. You're serious. Completely. Jorge looked at the check. At the $18 million she was refusing. At this woman who'd just saved everything he owned and was asking for the one thing he couldn't give. Why? He asked quietly. Because you said please. Because you're brilliant and terrified and so alone it breaks my heart. Because I watched my father work himself to death and I'm watching you do the same thing. Nancy picked up her bag. Because in 72 hours, you've been more real with me than you've probably been with anyone in 8 years. And I think you deserve to know what life feels like when you're not just surviving it. I have a company to run. Investors. Responsibilities. I know. And they'll still be there in 3 months. Or they won't. But at least you'll have lived. She headed for the door. Stopped. Looked back. I'm staying at the Oak Bluffs cottage. The one with blue shutters near Ocean Park. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. And if I don't? Nancy's smile was sad. Then you go back to your empire and your walls and your $2.8 billion. And I go back to my sabbatical. And we both keep doing what we've always done, building careers instead of lives. She left. Jorge stood in his office, holding an $18 million check she'd refused, staring at the door she'd just walked through. 3 months. She wanted 3 months of his time. It was the most insane, impossible, terrifying thing anyone had ever asked him. And some part of him, the part that had felt alive for the first time in 8 years over the past 72 hours, wanted desperately to say yes. September 17, 2025. Jorge stood in front of his board and proved Nancy had saved his company. The presentation took 40 minutes. System security restored. Backdoor closed. Marcus Chen's corporate espionage documented with enough evidence to guarantee criminal prosecution. Client data protected. Crisis averted. The board voted unanimously to maintain his position as CEO and pursue legal action. Jorge should have felt victorious. Instead, he sat in his empty office afterward, staring at an $18 million check Nancy Galliano had refused, and felt nothing. His phone buzzed. Declan. Declan, board is thrilled. You saved the company. Drinks tonight to celebrate? Jorge typed a response. Deleted it. Tried again. Jorge, can't. Need to handle something. Declan, the crisis consultant? Jorge, how did you know? Declan, because I've known you for 12 years and you've never turned down a victory drink. What did she do to you in 72 hours? Jorge stared at the question. At the honest answer he couldn't type, she saw me. Really saw me. And now I can't stop thinking about what she asked for. Jorge, I'll explain later. Declan, this should be good. Nancy spent the day after saving Jorge's company doing exactly what she'd come to Martha's Vineyard to do, absolutely nothing. She woke at 10. Made coffee slowly. Sat on her cottage porch watching tourists bike past on their way to Ocean Park. Read 40 pages of a novel she'd been meaning to finish for 3 years. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, she kept checking her phone. He's not going to call, she said out loud to no one. Because of course he wasn't. Jorge Britt was a 37-year-old billionaire who'd spent 8 years building walls around himself. He wasn't going to walk away from his empire for 3 months because a woman he'd known for 72 hours told him to start living. That would require vulnerability, trust, risk. All the things he'd spent nearly a decade avoiding. Nancy's phone rang. Not Jorge, Sienna. Tell me you didn't, her best friend said without preamble. Didn't what? Fall for the billionaire client you were supposed to be taking a break from saving. Nancy set down her coffee. I didn't fall for anyone. I saved his company and came home. Liar. You've been checking your phone every 5 minutes since you picked up. How do you know that? Because I know you. And because you get a specific tone in your voice when you're trying to convince yourself you don't care about someone. Sienna's voice softened. Nancy, what happened? Nancy told her. All of it. The 72 hours. The conversations at 3 a.m. when they were too exhausted to maintain professional distance. The way Jorge looked at her like she'd handed him oxygen after 8 years of forgetting to breathe. The $18 million she'd refused. The 3 months she'd asked for instead. Sienna was quiet for a long moment. Damn, she finally said. You asked a workaholic billionaire for his time instead of his money. That's either the bravest thing you've ever done or the most self-destructive. I know. Do you? Because Nancy, you came to the vineyard to figure out your own life. Not to fix another man who's forgotten how to live. I'm not trying to fix him. Aren't you? You asked for 3 months of his time. 3 months teaching him to be human again. That's exactly what you do, save people from themselves. Sienna paused. What happens when the 3 months are over and he goes back to his empire? What happens to you? Nancy didn't have an answer. After they hung up, she sat on her porch and tried to remember why she'd come here. What she'd been searching for before Jorge Britt called and derailed everything. Rest. Clarity. Space to figure out what she wanted beyond the next crisis. And then she'd met a man who needed saving and immediately offered to save him. Maybe Sienna was right. Maybe she hadn't learned anything at all. September 24, 2025, 1 week later. Nancy was painting the cottage shutters when Jorge's car pulled up. Not the SUV with security. His personal car, a Tesla that probably cost more than her annual salary. He got out wearing jeans and a gray Henley instead of his usual executive armor, and he looked like a man who'd spent a week not sleeping. Nancy climbed down from her ladder, paintbrush still in hand. You came, she said. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. Jorge stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets. About building a prison instead of a life. About dying at my desk like your father. And you're right. I've spent 8 years making myself untouchable. Unreachable. Safe. He pulled something from his pocket, the $18 million check. You wouldn't take this. Because you saw what I didn't. That I've been buying my way out of every uncomfortable emotion for almost a decade. Nancy set down her paintbrush. Jorge. I can't give you 3 months. Her chest tightened. Of course he couldn't. She'd asked for the impossible. But, Jorge continued, meeting her eyes, I can give you 1 month. October. 4 weeks. I'll delegate everything I can, set up my COO to handle the rest, and give you 30 days of my time. No work. No board meetings. No emails. That's not what I asked for. I know. But it's what I can offer without destroying everything I've built. He stepped closer. Will you take it? Will you take 4 weeks and, he hesitated. And teach me what you meant. About living instead of just surviving. Nancy looked at him. At this brilliant, terrified man who was offering her a fraction of what she'd asked for because it was all he could risk. At the vulnerability it cost him to drive here and admit he needed help. She should say no. Should hold out for the full 3 months. Should protect herself from falling for another workaholic who'd eventually choose the empire over everything else. But Jorge Britt was looking at her like she was the only person who'd seen him in 8 years. And Nancy had never been good at walking away from people who actually wanted to be saved. 1 month, she said. But I have conditions. Name them. We don't talk about your company unless something's actively on fire. We don't check email compulsively. And if your board calls with a crisis that's really just routine business, you let Declan handle it. Agreed. And you have to actually try. Not just show up physically while your brain is in a boardroom. You have to be present. Jorge nodded. What else? You let me plan everything. You show up and trust me with your time. That's, he stopped. Smiled slightly. Terrifying. Yes. Okay. Nancy felt her own smile forming. When do we start? Tomorrow. October 1st. I have a board meeting this afternoon to hand over October operations to Declan. After that, Jorge gestured to the island around them. I'm yours. For 4 weeks. Teach me how to be human again. That's a lot of pressure. You saved my company in 72 hours. I have faith in your abilities. Saving companies is easy. Saving people is harder. Then it's good I hired the best. They stood on the cottage lawn, paint-splattered and exhausted and taking the kind of risk neither of them had allowed themselves in years. Jorge? Nancy said. Yes? Thank you. For trying. For showing up. For trusting me with this. Thank you for not giving up on me when I said I couldn't give you 3 months. I haven't given up on you yet. But ask me again in 4 weeks. After he left, Nancy sat on her porch and tried to ignore the fact that her hands were shaking. She'd just agreed to spend a month with Jorge Britt. A month teaching him to live. A month in close proximity to a man who made her forget she was supposed to be figuring out her own life. Sienna was right. This was either very brave or very stupid. Nancy suspected it might be both. October 2nd, 2025. Their first full day started at dawn. Nancy picked him up at 6 a.m., handed him a coffee, and drove them to Menemsha Beach on the western edge of the island. We're watching the sunrise? Jorge asked, following her down to the sand. We're starting the day without screens. Without schedules. Without doing anything productive. Nancy sat on the beach, coffee in hand, facing the Atlantic. We're just being present for something beautiful. Jorge sat beside her. The ocean was gray and infinite in the early light. The beach was empty except for a few seagulls and the sound of waves. I can't remember the last time I watched a sunrise, he admitted. Neither can I. I've been too busy saving everyone else to notice the sun. Nancy glanced at him. We're a pair, aren't we? Both so good at fixing other people's disasters that we forgot to live our own lives. Is that what this month is? Living? That's the goal. 1 month of doing things that matter instead of things that profit. Of being present instead of productive. Of remembering why we started building our careers in the first place. The sun broke over the horizon, golden rose and almost painfully beautiful. Jorge felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been frozen for 8 years beginning to thaw. It's beautiful, he said quietly. It really is. Nancy's voice was soft. And it's free. No purchase necessary. Just showing up and letting yourself see it. They sat in silence as the sunrise painted the sky. 2 people who'd forgotten how to stop working, learning to just exist for a moment. What's next? Jorge asked when the sun was fully up. Nancy smiled. Breakfast. The kind you make yourself instead of having delivered. Then we're going sailing. I haven't sailed in years. I know. That's why we're doing it. The sailboat was a small rental from Edgartown Harbor. Nothing fancy, just enough for 2 people and the open water. Jorge hadn't been on a boat since he was a teenager, before his father died and everything became about survival instead of living. I don't remember how to do this, he admitted as Nancy checked the rigging. Good. Then you can't overthink it. You just have to trust me and feel it. She handed him the main sheet. When I say ready, you're going to pull this. The boat will catch the wind. And we're going to move. That's it? That's it. Sailing isn't complicated. We make it complicated. But at its core, it's just wind and water and trust. Nancy called ready. Jorge pulled. The sail filled with wind. And they were moving, cutting across the harbor, sun on their faces, wind in their hair, no destination except the horizon. Jorge laughed. Actual surprised laughter. Nancy looked at him, surprised. What? I forgot, he said. I forgot what this feels like. Being on the water. Not thinking about the next meeting or the next crisis. Just moving. That's the point. You've spent 8 years thinking 5 steps ahead. This month, we're learning to be exactly where we are. They sailed for 2 hours. Past the historic Edgartown Lighthouse. Along the coast where massive estates perched on cliffs. Through water so blue it hurt to look at. Jorge felt something he hadn't felt in almost a decade, peace. Not the absence of crisis. Not the relief of solving a problem. Just the simple, uncomplicated peace of being alive in a moment and not trying to optimize it. Thank you, he said as they returned to the harbor. For what? For this. For making me remember what it feels like to do something pointless and beautiful. Nancy smiled. The month's just started. Wait until I make you try painting. Absolutely not. You agreed to trust me with your time. I'm regretting that already. But he wasn't. And they both knew it. October 8th, 2025. A week into their month together, Jorge's mother called. He was at Nancy's cottage, helping her cook dinner, or more accurately, watching her cook while he chopped vegetables badly and made her laugh at his complete lack of culinary skills. He saw Helena's name on the screen. Almost didn't answer. Nancy saw his expression. Take it. Family calls don't count as work. Jorge answered. Hi, Ma. Jorge, darling. Declan tells me you've taken the month off. Are you dying? Should I be worried? Despite everything, Jorge smiled. His mother had a way of cutting through pretense. I'm not dying. I'm on Martha's vineyard. Taking a break. A break. You. The man who worked through his own appendicitis. That was one time. It was emblematic. Helena's voice softened. What's her name? Jorge glanced at Nancy, who was pointedly not listening while clearly listening. What makes you think there's a her? Because my son doesn't take breaks. He doesn't stop working. He doesn't remember that life exists outside boardrooms. A pause. Unless someone reminds him. So what's her name? Nancy. Nancy Galliano. And is she the reason you're finally living your life? Jorge watched Nancy move around the small kitchen, comfortable and real and completely unimpressed by his billions. She's the reason I'm trying. Good. Bring her to dinner. This Sunday. I want to meet the woman who accomplished the impossible. After he hung up, Nancy raised an eyebrow. Your mother wants to meet me? She wants to meet the woman who made me take a month off. She thinks you're a miracle worker. I saved your company from total collapse. That part didn't impress her? She thinks the company has had too much of my life already. She's been trying to get me to take a break for 8 years. Jorge paused. Will you come? To dinner? You want me to meet your mother? He stopped. Started again. I'd like you to meet her. She's important to me. And this, he gestured between them. Whatever this is, it feels important too. Nancy studied him. This is our second week. Meeting mothers is usually a third or fourth month thing. We only have 4 weeks total. I'm accelerating the timeline. Very efficient. I'm a billionaire CEO. Efficiency is what I do. Nancy laughed. Okay. Yes. I'll have dinner with your mother. But if she interrogates me about my intentions toward her son, she absolutely will. Then I'm blaming you for the awkwardness. Fair. They ate dinner at the small table in Nancy's cottage, pasta that Nancy had made from scratch while teaching Jorge the difference between al dente and overcooked. Wine from a local vineyard. Conversation that ranged from childhood memories to philosophy to why Jorge had never learned to cook. I always had assistants. Chefs. People who handled the details so I could focus on the company. And now? Now I'm learning that the details are actually the good parts. That cooking with someone is better than eating alone in a perfect kitchen. Jorge took a sip of wine. You're teaching me to see what I've been missing. I'm teaching you to slow down enough to notice you've been missing it. There's a difference. What have you been missing? The question caught Nancy off guard. I don't know, she admitted. That's why I came to the vineyard. To figure out what I want when I'm not saving the next crisis. And have you? Figured it out? Nancy looked at him, this brilliant, wounded man who was trying so hard to learn to be human again. At the way he looked at her like she held answers he didn't know he needed. I'm starting to, she said quietly. Jorge reached across the table. Took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her since the handshake 2 weeks ago, and the contact sent electricity up Nancy's arm. Nancy. His phone rang. Declan. Jorge pulled his hand back. Answered. Everything okay? Nancy watched his expression shift from open to guarded. From present to 5 steps ahead. No, don't. Jorge stood, pacing. Can't it wait until November? He stopped. Listened. How bad? Nancy's chest tightened. She knew that tone. Crisis mode. The wall's going back up. I'll call you back in 10 minutes. Jorge hung up. Looked at Nancy with genuine regret. Investor crisis. One of our major backers is threatening to pull funding over the Marqueschan scandal. Declan needs me to handle it, Nancy finished. I know. I'm sorry. I know the rules were. Something actively on fire counts as an exception. Nancy stood, started clearing plates. How long do you need? An hour. Maybe 2. I'll be on my laptop in the other room, you won't even know I'm. Jorge. Nancy stopped him with a hand on his arm. I'm not angry. Crisis management is what we both do. Handle your fire. But when you're done, you come back. To this table. To this conversation. To being present. Deal? Relief flooded his expression. Deal. Thank you for understanding. I understand because I'm exactly the same. I'd do the same thing if it was my crisis. Nancy smiled slightly. Now go save your company. Again. I'll be here when you're done. Jorge kissed her forehead, quick, impulsive, surprising them both, then disappeared into the cottage's second bedroom with his laptop. Nancy stood in the kitchen, touching her forehead where his lips had been, and tried to ignore the way her heart was racing. This was supposed to be about teaching him to live. Not about falling for him. But somewhere between sunrise on the beach and sailing in the harbor and cooking dinner in her tiny kitchen, Nancy had started to care about Jorge Britt in a way that had nothing to do with professional consulting. And that terrified her more than any 72-hour deadline ever had. October 12, 2025. Sunday dinner at Helena Britt's house in Oak Bluffs was simultaneously warm and terrifying. Helena, 65, elegant, with Jorge's gray eyes and none of his walls, hugged Nancy like they'd known each other for years. "So you're the woman who made my son remember he's human." "I'm trying," Nancy said. "He's a challenging student. He gets that from his father. Stubborn, brilliant, convinced work was the only thing that mattered." Helena led them to a dining room filled with photos of Jorge at various ages. "I lost my husband when Jorge was 17. Watched him work himself to death trying to build something that would outlast him. Watched Jorge learn all the wrong lessons from it." Jorge, setting the table at his mother's request, paused. "Ma, your father loved you. But he loved his work more. Or he convinced himself he did. And by the time he realized what he'd sacrificed, it was too late." Helena looked at her son. "I've watched you do the same thing for 8 years. Build an empire but forget to build a life. I'm trying to do better." "I know you are. Because of her." Helena smiled at Nancy. "Thank you. For seeing my son when he'd made himself invisible. For caring enough to ask him for something he couldn't buy." Nancy felt her throat tighten. "He's worth the effort." "I know he is. I'm just glad someone finally made him see it too." Over dinner, Elena's famous arroz con pollo, which Jorge admitted he'd forgotten how good it was, they talked about everything except Brit technologies. Helena told stories about Jorge as a teenager, brilliant and awkward and trying to save his family after his father died. Nancy shared memories of her own father, the lessons he'd taught her, the regrets she carried about his death. 59, Helena said quietly. "That's too young. I'm sorry you lost him. I'm sorry you lost your husband. I lost him long before he died. To work. To stress. To the belief that providing was the same as being present." Helena looked at Jorge. "Don't make the same mistake. The company will survive whether you work yourself to death or not. But the people who love you, we need you alive. Actually alive. Not just breathing while your soul is in a boardroom." After dinner, Jorge and Nancy walked along Ocean Park. The night was clear, stars visible over the Atlantic, the historic carousel lit up and spinning with music. "Your mother is wonderful," Nancy said. "She's also completely unsubtle about matchmaking." Was that what tonight was? Matchmaking? Jorge stopped walking. Turned to face her. "I don't know what tonight was. I know I wanted you to meet her. I know she's the most important person in my life. And I know," he paused. "I know that you're starting to matter to me in a way that has nothing to do with crisis consulting." Nancy's heart was pounding. "Jorge, I'm not asking for anything. We have 2 more weeks of our month together. He took a breath. "I'm just telling you the truth. That somewhere between sunrise on the beach and sailing in the harbor and watching you cook in your kitchen, I started to care about you. Really care. In a way I haven't let myself care about anyone since. Since your ex-fiancé destroyed you." "Yes." Nancy stepped closer. Close enough to see the vulnerability in his eyes. The fear. The hope. "I care about you too," she admitted. "And it terrifies me. Because I came here to fix my own life, not to fall for someone else's. Because I've spent 8 years saving people and I don't know how to just be with someone without trying to fix them. What if I don't need fixing? What if I just need," Jorge stopped. "What if I just need someone who sees me? Who makes me remember I'm more than my company? Then we're both in trouble. Because you make me remember I'm more than my next crisis too." They stood in Ocean Park, surrounded by the sounds of the carousel and the ocean, 2 people who'd spent years hiding behind their work suddenly too exposed to look away. Jorge reached up, tucked a strand of Nancy's hair behind her ear. His hand lingered on her cheek. "Can I kiss you?" he asked quietly. Nancy's breath caught. "We're supposed to be learning to live." "I know." And Nancy, his thumb traced her cheekbone. "This feels like living." She kissed him. Rose up on her toes and kissed him first, her hand sliding into his hair, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her close. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, careful, then deeper as 8 years of walls crumbled for both of them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jorge rested his forehead against hers. He started. "Yeah," Nancy agreed. "What do we do now?" "I have no idea. This wasn't part of the plan. We could pretend it didn't happen. Go back to our agreed month of learning to live. Keep things professional." Nancy pulled back enough to look at him. "Could you do that? Pretend you don't want to kiss me again right now?" "No. Me neither." Jorge's phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. "You should check that," Nancy said. He pulled out his phone. His expression shifted from soft to sharp. It's the board chair. Emergency meeting tomorrow morning. What kind of emergency? Jorge was already scanning emails, his entire posture changing. Marcus Chen's legal team is filing a countersuit, claiming I orchestrated the security breach to frame him. They're demanding a full investigation and my immediate suspension pending review. Nancy felt the moment slip away. Felt Jorge retreat into crisis mode, into the version of himself that lived in boardrooms instead of moments. You have to go back, she said. Not a question. Jorge looked at her. At the choice he was facing. Nancy, I can't let them destroy everything I've built because Marcus is lying. I have to fight this. I know. But we still have 2 weeks. I can handle the legal crisis and come back. Jorge. Nancy stepped back, putting distance between them. You can't do both. You can't fight a legal battle that could cost you your company and also learn to live without work consuming you. Those things are mutually exclusive. So what are you saying? I'm saying you have to choose. The month we agreed to, or your company. And we both know what you're going to choose. Jorge's jaw tightened. That's not fair. You're asking me to let them destroy my reputation, my company, everything I've built. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just telling you the truth. That you can't have both. You can't be present here with me and also be 5 steps ahead in a boardroom. It doesn't work. Then come with me. To the meetings. The legal strategy sessions. Be part of fighting this instead of making me choose between you and my life's work. That's exactly what I'm trying not to be. Another crisis I solve while my own life falls apart. Nancy's voice broke slightly. Jorge, I care about you. But I came here to figure out my own path. Not to get pulled into someone else's disaster. So this is it? I have 1 crisis and you walk away? You promised me a month. For weeks of actually trying to live differently. We're 2 weeks in and the first real crisis has you ready to abandon everything we've been building here. Because everything I've built for 14 years is at stake. And what about what we've built in 2 weeks? Does that matter at all? Jorge stared at her. At the impossible choice. At the woman who'd taught him to breathe again, asking him to choose her over the empire that had been his entire identity for 8 years. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly. I don't know how to be the man you need and also protect what I've built. I know. And that's the problem. Nancy turned and walked away. Jorge stood in Ocean Park, alone, his phone buzzing with board member calls, the taste of her still on his lips. And he had no idea which version of himself to choose. November 3, 2025. Stepping down as CEO turned out to be significantly harder than saying the words. Jorge sat in the Brit Technologies boardroom, his boardroom, the one he designed, the company he'd built from a dorm room 14 years ago, and listened to Declan present the Q3 projections. His best friend was brilliant. Capable. More than qualified. And every instinct Jorge had screamed at him to interrupt. To correct. To take control. He dug his fingernails into his palms and stayed silent. After the meeting, Declan found him in what used to be his office and was now Declan's office. You're struggling, Declan said. I'm fine. You've checked your phone 17 times in the last hour. You rewrote 3 of my emails before I could send them. And during the board meeting, I watched you physically restrain yourself from interrupting at least 6 times. Jorge sank into a chair that used to be his. This is harder than I thought. Letting go always is. Especially when you've been in control for 14 years. Declan sat across from him. But Jorge, you made the right choice. I saw you with Nancy. I've never seen you that happy. And if stepping back means you get to keep that? What if the company suffers? What if investors lose confidence? What if you let me do the job you promoted me to do? Declan's voice was gentle but firm. You hired me 9 years ago because I was good at this. Trust that decision. Trust me. I do trust you. Then prove it. Go back to Martha's Vineyard. Spend time with Nancy. Let me run the company for a month without you hovering. Declan smiled. Think of it as an experiment. If everything falls apart, you can come back and fix it. But I don't think it will. Jorge wanted to argue. Wanted to stay. Wanted to maintain control over the one thing he'd been able to control for the past 8 years. But he'd promised Nancy he'd choose differently. 1 month, he agreed. But you call me if the building is literally on fire, yes, I'll call. Otherwise, I've got this. Declan stood, offered his hand. Go live your life, man. The company will survive without you. I promise. Jorge shook his hand. Walked out of the building that had been his entire world. And tried to ignore the feeling that he was abandoning everything he'd built. November 5, 2025. Nancy was cooking dinner in her cottage, their cottage, Now that Jorge had officially moved in, when her phone rang with a number from her past. Vanguard Systems. The company she'd saved 2 years ago during her legendary 48-hour system rebuild. Nancy Galliano, she answered. Ms. Galliano, this is Richard Vanguard. I don't know if you remember. I remember. What's wrong? We're facing a similar crisis to 2023. Different attack vector, same level of catastrophe. Our current team can't contain it. We need you. He paused. 48 hours. Name your price. Please. Nancy looked at the kitchen where she was making arroz con pollo from Helena's recipe. At the domestic life she was building with Jorge. At the promise she'd made to herself to stop running to the next crisis. I'm not taking clients right now, she said. Ms. Galliano, we're talking about a complete data breach for a company that handles medical records for 3 million patients. If this information gets out, people could die. Identity theft. Blackmail. We need the best. And you're the best. Nancy closed her eyes. Medical records. 3 million people. Lives at stake. The same choice she'd given Jorge, her life, or someone else's crisis. I'll call you back in 10 minutes, she said. She found Jorge on the cottage deck, watching the sunset over the Atlantic. Doing exactly what she'd taught him, being present instead of productive. Vanguard Systems called, she said. Jorge turned. The company you saved in 2023? They're facing another crisis. Medical records breach. 3 million patients at risk. They need me for 48 hours. And you want to go? It wasn't a question. Jorge could see it in her face. I don't want to go. But Nancy stopped. People could get hurt if I don't help. Medical records exposed. Identity theft. Real harm to real people. Jorge stood, crossed to her, took her hands. Then go. Help them. But I told you I wouldn't do this. That I came to the vineyard to stop running to every crisis. That I wanted a life that wasn't just work. You did. And this isn't running to a crisis. This is choosing to use your gifts to help people who need you. There's a difference. Is there? Because it feels an awful lot like I'm about to do exactly what I criticized you for doing. No. You criticized me for choosing work over you every single time. For making work my entire identity. For refusing to build a life that had room for anything else. Jorge smiled. You have built that life. You're here. We're together. You cook dinner and paint terrible paintings and watch sunrises. And now you're being asked to help people in genuine need for 48 hours. That's not choosing work over us. That's being who you are while also being with me. Nancy's eyes filled with tears. What if I go and I can't stop? What if I fall back into the pattern of crisis to crisis, forgetting to come home? Then I'll remind you. The same way you remind me. That's what we do, we hold each other accountable. We help each other remember what matters. He kissed her forehead. Go save Vanguard. Save those 3 million people. And then come home to me. To us. To the life we're building. You're sure? I'm sure. Because Nancy, I'm learning something. Love isn't about never choosing work. It's about choosing each other even when work is demanding attention. It's about building a life that has room for both. Jorge held her face in his hands. Go be brilliant. I'll be here when you get back. Nancy kissed him, deep and grateful and terrified. 48 hours, she said. I promise. I believe you. November 6, 2025, Boston. Nancy arrived at Vanguard Systems at 8 a.m. and dove into the crisis. By 2 p.m., she'd identified the breach vector. By 8 p.m., she'd closed the primary vulnerability. By midnight, she was rebuilding security protocols and running on coffee and adrenaline and muscle memory. At 3 a.m., her phone rang. Jorge. You promised you'd sleep, he said. I will. After I finish this section. Nancy. Something in his voice made her stop typing. What's wrong? Nothing. I wanted to hear your voice. To remind you that there's a world outside that crisis. That I'm here. That you're not doing this alone. Nancy's chest tightened. I'm not alone. Her voice cracked. You're keeping me tethered. Good. Because I know what it's like to get lost in work. To forget there's anything else. I don't want that for you. I'm coming home tomorrow night. After the 48 hours. I promise. I know you are. I trust you. Jorge paused. I love you. It was the first time he'd said it since the beach. Since the watch. Since choosing her. I love you too, Nancy whispered. So much it terrifies me. Good. Terrified means we're doing it right. After they hung up, Nancy sat in the Vanguard server room and cried. Not from stress or exhaustion, but from the realization that she'd found someone who loved her enough to let her go and trusted her enough to believe she'd come back. Someone who understood that love wasn't about clipping each other's wings. It was about helping each other fly while building a home to return to. November 8, 2025. Nancy returned to Martha's Vineyard 46 hours after she'd left. Jorge met her at the ferry. Not with flowers or grand gestures. Just with his presence. His arms. His welcome home. They drove to the cottage in comfortable silence. How was it? Jorge asked as they sat on the deck with wine, watching the November sunset. Hard. Intense. I saved them. 3 million medical records secured. No data loss. Nancy leaned into him. And the whole time, I kept thinking about coming back here. To you. To this. Did it feel like running? Like falling into old patterns? No. It felt like using my gifts for something that mattered and then choosing to come home. Choosing us. She looked at him. You were right. There's a difference between making work your entire identity and choosing to do meaningful work while building a life. We're both learning that. Together. They sat in silence for a moment. Jorge? Nancy said. Yes? I got offered a permanent position. Vanguard wants me as their chief security officer. 7 figures. Boston-based. Jorge went very still. And I said I'd think about it. Because it's an incredible opportunity. But it would mean leaving the vineyard. Leaving the life we're building here. Do you want the job? I don't know. Part of me does. It's the kind of position I've worked toward my whole career. But part of me, Nancy stopped. Part of me wonders if taking it would be choosing work over us. The way I accused you of doing. Or maybe it would be choosing both. Building a career you love while building a life with me. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. They are if you're here and I'm in Boston. Jorge was quiet for a long moment. What if I came with you? To Boston. We could find a place together. I can run chairman duties remotely. Spend weekdays in Boston, weekends here. Build a life that includes both. Nancy turned to look at him. You'd leave Martha's Vineyard? Leave your mother? My mother is an hour flight away. And Nancy, I'm not leaving anything. I'm choosing you. Choosing us. Choosing a life that has room for your career and mine and the future we're building together. Nancy couldn't speak through the tears. That's terrifying. I know. But we're doing terrifying together now. Remember? November 15, 2025. The transition wasn't smooth. Declan called 3 times in one day about investor concerns. Jorge answered twice before Nancy reminded him he'd promised to let Declan handle it. Nancy worked 16-hour days finalizing the Vanguard position and nearly missed dinner twice. Jorge reminded her gently that work had boundaries. They fought. Actually fought. About whose career took priority, about whether they were falling into old patterns, about the fear that they were both too broken by work to build something healthy. What if we can't do this? Nancy said one night after a particularly difficult conversation about her accepting the Boston position. What if we're both too conditioned by our careers to actually build a life together? Then we keep trying. We keep choosing each other. We keep holding each other accountable. Jorge pulled her close. Nancy, neither of us knows how to do this perfectly. We're both learning. But I'd rather learn with you and fail sometimes than succeed alone. What if I take the Boston job and it consumes me? What if I become the workaholic I criticized you for being? Then I'll remind you to come home. The same way you remind me. That's what love is, not being perfect, but being willing to course correct when we're getting lost. Nancy buried her face in his chest. I'm scared. Me too. But I'm more scared of not trying. Of walking away because it's hard and spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. November 20, 2025. Helena invited them both to Thanksgiving dinner. The house was full, Declan and his wife, Helena's friends from the island, the warmth of community and family that Jorge had been avoiding for years. During dinner, Helena stood to give a toast. 18 months ago, I watched my son work himself into the hospital with stress. I watched him build a brilliant company and a completely empty life. I watched him become his father, brilliant, successful, and utterly alone. Jorge shifted uncomfortably. Nancy squeezed his hand under the table. And then this woman, Helena gestured to Nancy, walked into his life and demanded something no one had ever demanded before. His time. His presence. His actual self, not just his accomplishments. Ma, Jorge started. Let me finish. Helena's eyes were bright with tears. Jorge, you've spent 8 years punishing yourself for your father's choices. For not being there when he died. For not saving him from himself. But Mijo, you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Your father chose work. Every time. Until it killed him. The room was silent. But you're choosing differently, Helena continued. You're stepping back from the company. You're building a life. You're choosing love. And I am so proud of you. Not for the billions or the success. but for finally choosing to live. She raised her glass. To Jorge and Nancy. To second chances. To choosing love over fear. To building lives that matter more than the empires we leave behind. Everyone drank. After dinner, Jorge found Nancy on Helena's deck, looking out at the dark Atlantic. "Your mother is terrifying," Nancy said. "I know. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. She's right. About all of it." Nancy turned to face him. "I'm taking the Boston job." Jorge's expression didn't change. "Okay. And I want you to come with me. I want us to build a life together. In Boston during the week, here on weekends. I want to do this, the terrifying, complicated, messy work of building a relationship while building careers. Together. Are you sure?" "No. I'm terrified. But I'm sure about you. About us. About the fact that I'd rather risk everything with you than play it safe alone." Jorge pulled a small box from his pocket. Nancy's breath caught. "Jorge. I was going to wait. Do this romantically. At sunset or on the beach or somewhere meaningful." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, elegant, simple, perfect. "But I realized something. We don't need perfect moments. We need honest ones. Real ones." He got down on one knee on his mother's deck, in the cold November night, with his entire family probably watching through the windows. "Nancy Galliano, you saved my company. But more than that, you saved my life. You taught me that time is the only currency that actually matters. That presence is worth more than billions. That love requires choosing someone over and over, even when it's hard." Nancy was crying. "I don't know how to be perfect at this. I'll probably work too much sometimes. I'll probably forget to be present when you need me. I'll probably fail at this more times than I succeed." Jorge's voice cracked. "But I promise I'll keep trying. I'll keep choosing you. Every day. Every moment. For the rest of my life. Jorge. Marry me. Build a life with me. Teach me how to keep being human. Let me love you the way you've taught me love should be, present, intentional, and brave enough to risk everything." Nancy pulled him to his feet. Kissed him while tears streamed down both their faces. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to Boston. Yes to building a life together. Yes to all of it." Jorge slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. Through the window, they could hear Helena crying happy tears and Declan starting a round of applause. "I love you," Jorge said. "I know I don't say it enough. I know I'm still learning how to show it. But Nancy, I love you more than I've ever loved anything. More than the company. More than success. More than safety. I love you too. Even though you're going to drive me crazy when you backslide into working too much. And you're going to drive me crazy when you do the same thing. So we're both disasters learning to be functional together." "Exactly." Jorge rested his forehead against hers. "I can't wait." November 25, 2025. Moving to Boston was surreal. Jorge had never lived anywhere but Martha's Vineyard since building his fortune. Nancy had never shared space with anyone she was in a relationship with. They found an apartment in Back Bay, close to Vanguard's offices, with a view of the Charles River that reminded them of the ocean. The first week was chaos. Unpacking. Setting up home offices. Establishing boundaries about work hours. Fighting about whose meeting was more important and then apologizing and figuring out how to compromise. "This is harder than I thought," Nancy admitted one night as they ate takeout surrounded by moving boxes. "What part?" "All of it. Living together. Building a life. Figuring out whose career takes priority when we're both busy. We'll figure it out. Together." Jorge pulled her close. "Besides, we've survived harder things. 72-hour company collapses. Legal battles. Choosing to be vulnerable after years of walls. We can survive figuring out whose turn it is to do dishes." Nancy laughed despite herself. "I love you. I love you too. Even when you leave your crisis management notes all over the kitchen table. Even when you check your phone during dinner. I'm working on that." "I know. We both are." They sat in their new apartment, surrounded by the chaos of building a life together, and felt something neither had felt in years. Hope. Real, terrifying, beautiful hope that they could actually do this. Build careers they loved and a life together. Be successful and present. Choose work when it mattered and each other when it mattered more. It wouldn't be perfect. They'd fail sometimes. Backslide. Fight. Struggle. But they'd do it together. And that made all the difference. January 10, 2026. Jorge woke up to 17 missed calls. All from Declan. All in the last hour. Beside him, Nancy stirred. "What's wrong?" "I don't know." Jorge checked the time, 6:47 a.m. They'd moved to Boston 6 weeks ago. Life had settled into a rhythm, Nancy's demanding CSO position at Vanguard, Jorge's scaled-back chairman role, weekends on Martha's Vineyard. It was working. Until this moment. He called Declan back. "Thank God," his best friend said. "We have a problem. A massive problem." "What happened?" "Marcus Chen. He's released everything. All the data he stole. Client information. Proprietary code. Security vulnerabilities. Everything. He dumped it on the dark web 3 hours ago with a manifesto about how you framed him." Jorge went cold. "How bad?" "Catastrophic. 73 Fortune 500 companies compromised. Government agencies. Banks. The board is in emergency session. Regulators are descending." "Jorge," Declan's voice cracked. "I don't know if I can fix this. I need you. The company needs you." Nancy was sitting up now, watching Jorge's face. "I'll be on the first flight," Jorge said. "Wait." Nancy caught his arm. "Jorge, what's happening?" He told her. Watched her face shift from sleep-soft to crisis-sharp. Watched her become the consultant who'd saved his company in 72 hours. "This is the final test," she said quietly. "Marcus's last revenge. He's forcing you to choose between letting Declan handle it or running back to save the company yourself. Declan can't handle this alone. You heard him, he's overwhelmed. 73 companies compromised. This could destroy everything. Or it could prove that you've actually built a company that can survive without you micromanaging every crisis." Nancy took his hands. "Jorge, if you go back now, if you take control from Declan during the biggest crisis he's faced, you're telling him you don't actually trust him. You're telling yourself you haven't actually changed. People are going to lose billions. Governments could be compromised. This isn't about pride or trust, this is about actual harm. Then help him. Be available. Offer advice. But don't take over." Nancy's voice was firm. "You promoted Declan because he's brilliant. Let him be brilliant. Let him prove he can handle this. And you prove that you've actually learned to delegate." Jorge wanted to argue. Wanted to get on a plane. Wanted to take control. Instead, he called Declan back. "I'm not coming to the office," he said. Silence. "What? You're the CEO. This is your crisis to manage. But I'm here. On the phone. Available for advice, strategy, whatever you need. I trust you to handle this." "Jorge, I can't." "Yes, you can. You've been preparing for this for 9 years. You know the systems. You know the clients. You know how I'd handle it, now show me how you'd handle it better." Nancy watched Jorge spend the next 6 hours on the phone. Advising. Supporting. Guiding Declan through the crisis without taking control. Watched him physically restrain himself from getting on a plane a dozen times. At 3 p.m., Declan called with an update. "We've contained it. Notified all affected clients. Engaged crisis management teams. Coordinated with federal agencies. We're going to survive this, Jorge. It's going to be ugly and expensive, but we're going to survive. You did it. We did it. I couldn't have without your advice. You could have. You just didn't have to." Jorge's voice was rough with emotion. "I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry I didn't trust you with this sooner." After he hung up, Nancy found him standing at their apartment window, staring out at the Charles River. "You didn't go," she said. "I didn't go. How does it feel?" Jorge turned to face her. "Terrifying. Liberating. Like watching your child ride a bike without training wheels, you're terrified they'll crash but proud they're trying. The company's going to survive. Declan's going to be okay. And you," Nancy crossed to him, wrapped her arms around his waist. "You just proved you've actually changed. That you can let go. That you trust the people you've built around you. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. You just didn't have to. Because we're in this together now." Jorge kissed her, deep and grateful and still slightly terrified. "Thank you," he said against her lips. "For stopping me. For reminding me who I'm trying to be. That's what we do. We keep each other tethered to what matters." February 14, 2026, Valentine's Day. They planned the wedding for June. Small ceremony on Martha's Vineyard. Immediate family and close friends only. Nothing elaborate, just the commitment and the people who mattered. But first, there was one conversation Jorge needed to have. He found Nancy in their home office, reviewing security protocols for Vanguard. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About the day I left you at the altar. The day I didn't show up 8 years ago." Nancy looked up, confused. "Jorge, that wasn't you. That was your ex-fiancé?" "No. I mean the metaphor. The pattern." Jorge sat across from her. "When Marcus released that data, every instinct I had screamed at me to run back to the company. To take control. To save everything myself. And for about 30 seconds, I was that man again, the one who would choose the empire over everything else. But you didn't. You stayed. Because you stopped me. But Nancy, I need you to know, that instinct doesn't just disappear. The urge to control, to save, to handle everything myself, it's still there. I've just learned to recognize it and choose differently. I know. I have the same instinct. Last week when Vanguard had that security scare, I almost worked through the night. You reminded me to sleep. To trust my team. To come to bed. We're both recovering workaholics. Exactly. And we're going to backslide sometimes. We're going to have to keep reminding each other. Keep choosing each other over the crises that feel urgent but aren't actually more important than us. Jorge pulled out a small notebook. I wrote my vows. I want you to hear them before the wedding. To make sure you know what you're signing up for. Jorge. Please. I need you to hear this. He read. Nancy, I stand before you as a man who spent 8 years believing love was a weakness. That vulnerability was something to be avoided. That the only safe way to live was alone. You taught me I was wrong about everything. I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't promise I won't sometimes check my phone during dinner or get pulled into work when I should be present. I can't promise the instinct to control and save and handle everything alone will ever completely disappear. But I can promise I'll keep trying. I'll keep choosing you. I'll keep remembering that you asked for my time, and time is the only thing I can never get back. I promise to show up. Not just physically, but actually present. To listen when you need me. To let you save me when I'm drowning. To build a life with you that's bigger than either of our careers. I promise to keep learning. To keep growing. To keep being brave enough to be vulnerable with you, even when it terrifies me. And I promise to love you. Every day. In the small moments and the big ones. When it's easy and when it's hard. When we're celebrating and when we're fighting. I will love you with my whole heart, for as long as I live. You asked for my time. I'm giving you my life. All of it. Forever. Nancy was crying before he finished. She couldn't speak. That's perfect. That's exactly what I need to hear. Your turn. What are your vows? Nancy pulled out her own phone. I wrote mine too. She read. Jorge, I spent 8 years saving everyone except myself. Convincing myself that if I could fix enough crises, pull enough companies back from disaster, maybe I'd fill the hole my father's death left. You taught me I was trying to fill it with the wrong things. I can't promise I'll always remember to choose us over work. I can't promise I won't get pulled into the next crisis, the next emergency, the next person who needs saving. I can't promise the instinct to run toward disaster instead of staying home will ever completely disappear. But I can promise I'll keep coming back. I'll keep choosing you. I'll keep remembering that you gave me your time, and that's the most valuable thing anyone has ever given me. I promise to show up. To be present. To let you save me when I need it. To build a life with you where we both get to be brilliant and happy. Successful and human. I promise to keep reminding you that you're more than your company. That your worth isn't measured in billions but in moments. In sunrises and conversations and the life we're building together. And I promise to love you. Imperfectly. Honestly. With all my fears and flaws and the parts of me that are still learning how to be loved. You gave me your time. I'm giving you my heart. All of it. Forever. They sat in their home office, crying and laughing and holding each other. We're really doing this, Nancy said. We're really doing this. It's terrifying. It really is. I can't wait. June 2nd, 2026. The wedding took place at sunset on Gay Head Cliffs. 8 years to the day after Jorge's first wedding that never happened. 6 years to the day after his ex-fiancée left him at the altar. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. 50 people gathered on the cliffs overlooking the Atlantic. Helena sat in the front row, crying happy tears. Declan stood as Jorge's best man. Sienna stood as Nancy's maid of honor. And as the sun began to set over Martha's Vineyard, Jorge Britt and Nancy Galliano got married. Jorge wore a simple navy suit. Nancy wore an elegant ivory dress that moved in the ocean breeze. No elaborate production. Just two people making promises they intended to keep. Pastor Jerome, who'd become a friend after Elena's health scare, officiated. Marriage, he said, is not about two perfect people finding each other. It's about two imperfect people choosing to grow together. To carry each other's burdens. To celebrate each other's victories. To show up, even when it's hard. Jorge and Nancy faced each other, hands joined. When it came time for vows, Jorge spoke first. Nancy, you saved my company in 72 hours. But it took you much longer to save me from myself. Thank you for being patient. For seeing past my walls. For refusing $18 million and asking for something I couldn't buy. The guests laughed through their tears. I promise to keep choosing you. Over work. Over control. Over the fear that's lived in me since I was 29 years old. I promise to show up. To be present. To love you with my whole heart, for the rest of my life. Nancy's voice was steady despite the tears. Jorge, you taught me that accepting help isn't weakness, it's love. That building a life doesn't mean abandoning your work. It means making room for both. Thank you for trusting me with your time. For learning to be vulnerable. For choosing to live instead of just survive. She squeezed his hands. I promise to keep coming home. To keep reminding you what matters. To build a life with you where we're both whole, successful in our work and present in our love. I promise to love you exactly as you are, while helping you become who you want to be. They exchanged rings, not elaborate, just simple bands engraved with the date. By the power vested in me, Jerome said, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jorge, you may kiss your bride. And this time, he smiled. You actually showed up. Jorge pulled Nancy close and kissed her as the sun set over the Atlantic, painting the sky in gold and rose and the promise of tomorrow. The guests erupted in applause. When they pulled apart, both crying, Jorge whispered, I showed up. You really did. I'll keep showing up. Every day. For the rest of our lives. I know. I believe you. They walked down the aisle together, husband and wife, partners, two people who'd learned that the bravest thing you could do was choose to be loved. Epilogue, June 2, 2027, 1 year later. Nancy woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of waves. They were back on Martha's vineyard for their anniversary. The cottage, their cottage, the one where they'd spent that first month learning to live, was theirs now. Weekend retreat. Summer home. The place they came to remember. Jorge appeared in the bedroom doorway with 2 cups of coffee. Happy anniversary, he said. Happy anniversary. Nancy accepted the coffee, scooted over so he could sit beside her. 1 year. 1 year of you putting up with me checking my phone during dinner. 1 year of you putting up with me working too late. 1 year of us both learning to do better. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, watching the morning sun paint the ocean gold. Declan called, Jorge said. Brit Technologies just closed the Meridian deal. Biggest acquisition in company history. And you're here. Not in the boardroom. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Jorge set down his coffee, pulled Nancy close. The company's doing better without me micromanaging. Declan's brilliant. The team is strong. And he paused. I'm happy. Actually, genuinely happy. For the first time in 8 years. Me too. Vanguard's thriving. My team is handling everything. And I get to come home to you every night. Get to build a life that's more than just the next crisis. Nancy's phone buzzed. Vanguard. Security alert. She glanced at it. Looked at Jorge. Your team can handle it, he said gently. You taught me that. Now I'm reminding you. Nancy silenced her phone. You're right. They've got it. Look at us. Actually delegating. Actually trusting other people. Actually living. Your mother would be proud. She is proud. She told me yesterday. Also asked when we're giving her grandchildren. Nancy laughed. We've been married 1 year. Tell her to be patient. I did. She said she's 67 and doesn't have time for patience. They spent the morning the way they'd spent that first month, sailing in Edgartown Harbor, no destination except the horizon. Walking through Oak Bluffs, past the gingerbread cottages where Nancy had first stayed. Watching the sunset from the same beach where Jorge had proposed. Do you ever miss it? Nancy asked as they sat on Menemsha Beach. Running the company every day. Being in the center of everything. Sometimes. But then I remember what I was like before you. Successful. Wealthy. Completely empty. Jorge pulled her close. I don't miss that person. I like who I am now better. Who are you now? A man who watches sunrises. Who knows his wife's coffee order by heart. Who leaves work at 6 because dinner together matters more than one more email. Who's building a life instead of just an empire. Nancy rested her head on his shoulder. I like who you are now too. Who are you now? A woman who comes home. Who trusts her team. Who knows that saving people doesn't mean sacrificing herself. Nancy smiled. A woman who's learning to be saved, too. They sat until the stars came out over the Atlantic. You know what tomorrow is? Jorge asked. Sunday. Why? It's our day. No work. No phones. Just us. He pulled out the watch, his grandfather's watch, the one he'd given her as a promise. I'm giving you tomorrow. All 24 hours. What do you want to do with them? Nancy thought about it. About the woman she'd been 18 months ago, burned out, hiding on an island, trying to figure out what she wanted when she wasn't saving the next crisis. She'd figured it out. I want to do nothing productive, she said. I want to sleep late and make breakfast together and read books on the porch. I want to exist without purpose for a whole day. Just be with you. That's the best plan I've ever heard. June 3, 2027. They spent Sunday exactly as planned. Slept until 10. Made pancakes that turned out mediocre but were perfect anyway. Read books on the cottage porch. Painted terrible watercolors of the ocean. Took a nap in the afternoon sun. Did absolutely nothing productive. And it was the best day either of them could remember. As the sun set, they sat on the porch with wine and the comfortable silence of two people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. "I love you," Jorge said. "I love you too." "Thank you." "For what?" "For not taking the 18 million. For asking for my time instead. For teaching me that life is what happens when you're not building an empire." Nancy leaned over and kissed him. "Thank you for showing up. For choosing differently than your father. For learning to be present. For giving me your time. Best investment I ever made. Better than Brit Technologies? Not even close. The company made me rich. You made me human." They sat as the sky turned from gold to purple to star-filled black. Two people who'd spent years surviving, finally learning to live. Two people who'd been broken by work, learning to be whole through love. Two people who'd found each other in a crisis and chosen to build a life in the calm. "Jorge?" Nancy said into the darkness. "Yeah? We did it. We actually built a life. Careers we love and a marriage that matters. We're doing the impossible. We are. Together. I'm really glad I saved your company in 72 hours. Jorge laughed. "I'm really glad you asked for something I couldn't buy. Best negotiation of my career." "Mine too." They sat in the Martha's Vineyard darkness, holding hands, watching the stars, living the life they'd chosen. And for two people who'd spent years measuring success in billions and crises solved, the greatest success was this. Being here. Being present. Being together. Being alive. She asked for $18 million. He offered his time instead. Wait, no. She asked for his time. He offered $18 million. And when she chose his time over his money, everything changed. If this story touched you, if you believe time is the only currency that really matters, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. Tell us, would you have taken the $18 million or asked for his time? Be honest. We want to hear your answer. Subscribe for daily emotional love stories where broken people become whole. Turn on notifications so you never miss when love wins. Like if you've ever chosen someone over success. Share with someone who needs to remember what actually matters. Next story drops Friday. It's about a woman who's been invisible her whole life, until one man sees her and changes everything. Thank you for spending an hour with Jorge and Nancy. Remember, your time is the most valuable thing you'll ever give someone. Choose wisely. See you in the next story.